begin with the bell chant, and afterwards we will maintain noble silence. When all dharmas are Buddha Dharma, there are enlightenment and delusion, practice, life and death, Buddhas and creatures. When the 10,000 dharmas are without self, there are no delusions, no enlightenment, no Buddhas, no creatures, no life and no death. The Buddha way transcends being and non-being, therefore there are life and death, delusion and enlightenment, creatures and Buddhas. Nevertheless, flowers fall with our attachment and weeds spring up with our aversion. To carry the self forward and realize the 10,000 dharmas is delusion. Let the 10,000 dharmas advance and realize the self is enlightenment. It is Buddhas who enlighten delusion. It is creatures who are deluded in enlightenment. Further, there are those who attain enlightenment above enlightenment. There are those who are deluded within delusion. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, one need not be aware of being Buddha. However, one is the realized Buddha and further advances in realizing Buddha. Seeing forms with the whole body and mind, hearing sounds with the whole body and mind, one understands them intimately. Yet it is not like a mirror with reflections, nor like water under the moon. When one side is realized, the other side is dark. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas. To be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas is to free one's body and mind and those of others. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this traceless enlightenment is continued forever. When one first seeks the truth, one separates oneself from it. When one has already correctly transmitted the truth to oneself, one is one's original self at that moment. When riding on a boat, if one watches the shore, one may assume that the shore is moving. By watching the boat directly, one knows that it is a boat that moves. If one examines the 10,000 dharmas with a deluded body and mind, one will suppose that one's mind and nature are permanent. But if one practices intimately and returns to the true self, it will be clear that the 10,000 dharmas are without self. Firewood turns into ash and does not turn into firewood again. But do not suppose that the ash is after and the firewood is before. We must realize that firewood is in the state of being firewood and has its before and after. Yet having this before and after, it is independent of them. Ash is in the state of being ash and it has its before and after. Just as firewood does not become firewood again after it is ash, so after one's death, one does not return to life again. Thus, that life does not become death is a confirmed teaching of the Buddha Dharma. For this reason, life is called the non-born. That death does not become life is a confirmed teaching of the Buddha Dharma. Therefore, death is called the non-extinguished. Life is a period of itself. Death is a period of itself. For example, they are like winter and spring. We do not think that winter becomes spring, nor do we say that spring becomes summer. Gaining enlightenment is like the moon reflected in the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water disturbed. Although its light is extensive and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle of an inch across, the whole moon and the whole sky reflected in a dewdrop in the grass, in one drop of water. Enlightenment does not disturb the person, just as the moon does not disturb the water. A person does not hinder enlightenment, just as a dewdrop does not hinder the moon in the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. As for the duration of the reflection, we should examine the water's vastness or smallness, and we should discern the brightness or dimness of the heavenly moon. When the truth does not fill our body and mind, we think that we have enough. When the truth fills our body and mind, we realize that something is missing. For example, when we view the four directions from a boat on the ocean, where no land is in sight, we see only a circle and nothing else. No other aspects are apparent. However, this ocean is neither round nor square, and its qualities are infinite in variety. It is like a palace. It is like a jewel. It just seems circular as far as our eyes can reach at the time. The 10,000 dharmas are likewise like this. Although ordinary life and enlightened life assume many aspects, we only recognize and understand through practice what the penetrating power of our vision can reach. In order to appreciate the 10,000 dharmas, we should know that altogether they may look round or square. The other qualities of oceans and mountains are infinite in variety. Furthermore, other universes lie in all quarters. So it is not only around ourselves, but also right here and in a single drop of water. When a fish swims in the ocean, there is no limit to the water, no matter how far it swims. When a bird flies in the sky, there is no limit to air, no matter how far it flies. However, no fish or bird has ever left its element since the beginning. When the need is large, it is used largely. When the need is small, it is used in a small way. Thus, no creature ever comes short of its own completeness. Wherever it stands, it does not fall. It does not fail to cover the ground. If a bird leaves the air, it will die at once. If a fish leaves the water, it will die at once. Know then that water is life. Know that air is life. Life is a bird and life is a fish. Beyond these, there are further implications and ramifications. In this way, there are practice and enlightenment, mortality and immortality. Now, if a bird or a fish tries to reach the limit of its element before moving in it, this bird or this fish will not find its way or its place. Attaining this place, one's daily life is the realization of ultimate reality, Genjo Koan. Attaining this way, one's daily life is the realization of ultimate reality, Genjo Koan. Since this place and this way are neither large nor small, neither self nor other, neither existing previously nor just arising now, they therefore exist thus. Thus, if one practices and realizes the Buddha way, when one gains one Dharma, one penetrates one Dharma, when one encounters one action, one practices one action. Since the place is here and the way leads everywhere, the reason the limits of the knowable are unknowable is simply that our knowledge arises with and practices with the absolute perfection of the Buddha Dharma. Do not practice thinking that realization must become the object of one's knowledge and vision and be grasped conceptually. Even though the attainment of realization is immediately manifest, its ultimate nature is not necessarily realized. Some may realize it and some may not. Priest Baocha of Magu Mountain was fanning himself. A monk approached and asked, "Sir, the nature of the wind is permanent, and there is no place it does not reach. Why then must you still fan yourself?" "Although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent," the master replied, "you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere." "What is the meaning of its reaching everywhere?" asked the monk. The master just fanned himself. The monk bowed with deep respect. This is the enlightened experience of the Buddha Dharma in the vital way of its correct transmission. Those who say we should not use a fan because wind is permanent, and so we should know the existence of wind without using a fan, know neither permanency nor the nature of wind. Because the nature of wind is eternally present, The wind of Buddhism actualizes the gold of the earth and ripens the cheese of the long river. Now maintain the silence. this time, I'd ask our incense offers, incense lighters to please come forward. And you can find the incense gata in your booklet. We'll chant along. Right. And we say, in gratitude, we offer this incense throughout space and time to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May it be fragrant as earth herself, reflecting careful efforts, wholehearted awareness, and the fruit of understanding, slowly ripening. May we and all beings be companions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May we awaken from forgetfulness and realize our true home. Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody here. We got almost a full house. It's good. Got some courtesy announcements. So I can find them. Yes. Families with small children are welcome to use the downstairs area for their needs. And there's a water fountain and cups available as well. If you find that there's a need for seats for family members to sit together, can you please adjust your seats accordingly? Would like to remind you not to walk in front of the dais here. And if you need to go to the other side, please go around the back, please. And we chant at a medium upbeat tempo to breathe life into the sutras. It's not meant to be a funeral dirge. So we will next stand to greet each other, each side, bow to each other. Next we'll chant. You can find the three refuges on page 7. I go for refuge to the Buddha, my deeply awakened mind, the living source of understanding and compassion, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to Dharma, the path of mindful living, leading to healing, joy, and enlightenment, the way of peace, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the loving and supportive community of practice, realizing harmony, awareness, and liberation, which must be cultivated to be known fully. I am aware that the three jewels are within my heart. I vow to realize them. I vow to understand living beings and their suffering. I vow to cultivate loving kindness and compassion, and to practice joy and equanimity. I vow to live simply and sanely, content with few possessions, and to keep my body healthy. I vow to let go of all worry and anxiety in order to be light and free. I am aware that I owe so much to my parents, teachers, friends, and all beings. I vow to be worthy of their trust, to practice wholeheartedly, so that understanding and compassion will flower, and I can help living beings be free from their suffering. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. May the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha support my efforts. The next page. Sutra. The Bodhisattva of great compassion, from the deep practice of prajna, paramita, received the emptiness of all 5 skandhas, and delivered all beings from their suffering. O Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness,
Emptiness no other than form. Form is emptiness, emptiness form. The same is true of feeling, thought, impulse, and consciousness. O Shariputra, all dharmas are empty. They are not born nor annihilated. They are not defiled nor immaculate. They do not increase nor decrease. So in emptiness, no form, no feeling, no thought, no impulse, no consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or objects of mind, no realm of sight, no realm of consciousness, no ignorance, nor extinction of ignorance, no old age and death, nor extinction of them, no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cease from suffering, no path to the out of suffering, no knowledge, no attainment, no realization, for there is nothing to attain. Love is not love, holds on to nothing, Prajna, Paramita. Therefore the mind is clear of any delusive hindrance. Without hindrance there is no fear. Away from all perverted views, one reaches final nirvana. All the Buddhas of past, present, and future, through faith in Prajna, Paramita, attain to the highest perfect enlightenment. Know then the Prajna, Paramita, is the great Dharma, the radiant fearless mantram, the utmost supreme mantram, which is capable of allaying all pain. This is true beyond all doubt. Proclaim now the highest wisdom, the Prajna, Paramita. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Amaha Prajna Paramita Pradaya Sutra.
Thank you. You want to be seated? All right. So this talk is titled "The Life of Curly-Haired Baddha," or Baddha Kundalakesa. And a quick warning: Baddha's name sounds very close to Buddha, so I'm going to try to pronounce Baddha just a little bit different than Buddha. So we've got Baddha and Buddha. It should be understandable, hopefully, in the course of the talk. So 2,500 years ago, in the time of the Buddha, in India, there lived a woman named Baddha. She was born in the town of Rajagaha to the family of King Bimbisara's royal treasurer. This is the same Bimbisara who was famous for donating a bamboo grove to the Buddha and the early Sangha. Being a royal treasurer was a very lofty position, And Baddha's name is an indication of this, which means auspicious, since the family's wealth increased so much around the time of her birth. She was apparently very passionate and prone to arguing when she didn't get her way. And it's said that her parents kept her locked inside of the home, which is probably more of a castle, in order to, quote unquote, protect her from herself. But she had a very, very strong will, as you'll see. Once she grew older, her parents began presenting various young men to her as potential suitors, but she refused every single one of them outright. And this would have been quite an issue because at the time it was incumbent on young women to get married so that they could help produce many sons for the family. It was about this time that a young man named Sataka, which means the little thief, had just been captured while breaking into a home. And it wasn't the first time. Apparently, he was very well known to the authorities. So once he was sitting or standing in front of the king, he was condemned to flogging and execution. Well, it just happens that Baddha happened to see Sataka along the way to the execution grounds, and she fell in love with him on sight. Apparently, he was very handsome, and I'm assuming that there was probably something in his defiant demeanor that it really spoke to Baddha. When her parents found out about this, they were shocked, and they tried to change her mind. But as we said, she has a very strong will, and once Baddha set her mind to something, she was going to get it. And so she threatened to starve herself to death if her family wouldn't let her marry Sataka. And for Baddha, this was not an idle threat. So her father, being a very rich and powerful man, but also one that didn't want to see his daughter harm herself, relented. He went to the jail warden, bribed him, and got Sataka released. They brought him home, washed him up, dressed him up nicely, and prayed that their wealth and their daughter's love would be enough to put Sataka on the right path. Well, a few days later, after the marriage ceremony, Sataka told Baddha that he'd been saved from execution because he'd prayed to the mountain god, supposedly causing Baddha to notice him and rescue him from his predicament. He told the mountain god that if he were saved, he'd go up to the mountain to offer a worthy sacrifice. And so Baddha dressed herself up in her finest jewelry, prepared the sacrifice, and made her way up the mountain with her new groom. When they reached the top of the mountain, Baddha, so happy and pleased with how she'd finally transformed into a wife and hopefully soon a mother, turned to see Sataka standing there with a scowl on his face. He said to her, "Silly girl, didn't you know that you are the sacrifice? I brought you up here to take your jewelry and throw you from the mountain." With tears in her eyes, Baddha was forced to remove her jewelry, place it in her outer shawl, and hand it over to Sataka. She pleaded with him to spare her life, telling him that she wanted to go with him wherever he was going to go, but he said no. So displaying a sharp and quick-witted thinking and a natural understanding of human nature, Baddha pleaded with Sataka to allow her to pay her respects to him one last time, and he agreed. Baddha then circled Sataka 3 times, and this was a common practice in India, walking in a circle around someone as an act of veneration. It happens in the beginning of many suttas. However, unlike in any of the suttas, once Baddha had circled Sataka for the 3rd time, she pushed him from behind with all of her might and sent him tumbling down the mountain. And although her physical life had been saved, the fabric of Baddha's life had been destroyed. She was still a very young woman from a very important family. She could have returned to the life that she'd been leading, and she could have found another husband, become a mother, raised a family, but like many of us, she found herself at a point where nothing made sense, where everything that she thought was true had been revealed to be a lie. Sataka hadn't been able to kill her physically, but he had killed the person that she thought she'd been. He'd killed her old life, and she saw no way back. And so Baddha wandered off aimlessly, hoping to become an ascetic, striving to live a life of wandering and self-discipline. She eventually came across a group of Jain nuns and decided to join them. Now, if you haven't heard of the Jains before, they have as long and rich of a tradition in Buddhism as Buddhism does. Their founder, Mahavira, was a contemporary of the Buddha, and a few of his followers actually feature in the suttas of the Pali Canon, posing questions to the Buddha. The Jains, if we're going to boil their teachings down to the most basic level, unlike the Buddhists, They do believe in a self or a soul. They believe in karma as well. However, for them, karma is a physical property that becomes bound to the soul. And they believe that all these little particles of karma gather around and obscure the innate nature of the soul. Their strongest belief, however, is ahimsa, which is nonviolence, which they take to an even further level than the Buddhists do. So you can still find Jain monks and nuns sweeping the ground as they walk to prevent themselves from inadvertently harming insects or tiny creatures. You often see them wearing masks so they don't inadvertently inhale a bug. All of this non-harming, however, has a flip side in the austerities that their monastics undergo. So, for example, instead of shaving their heads, the Jain monks often will pluck each hair out one by one. And this is all part of a strategy to remove those negative karma particles from their souls so they can be released from samsara, which is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and to attain, as they see it, infinite state of eternal bliss. So as you can see, this is a bit different than in Buddhism, where we strive for a middle way between the extremes, between painful ascetic practices and the indulgences of everyday life. So Baddha joined these nuns, had her hair plucked out over and over again, studied their doctrines, and worked away on burning off of her evil karma. And still a young woman, it's said that she learned the whole of their doctrine very fast, and just as fast became dissatisfied with it. I like to think that Baddha, who is ever the contrarian, is still so full of life and love that these very stark ascetic practices wouldn't have appealed to her. Her will was so strong that it needed to be exercised. Punishing herself or cleansing herself, that's not where it was for her. She was a bit of a force of nature. She needed to go out there and act on the world to transform it into her own shape, which ultimately caused her to leave the Jains and go wandering from village to village, learning what she could from the elder ascetics that she met along the way. And she would debate with them, often quite forcibly, debate with anyone who dare stand toe-to-toe with her. And it was said she traveled this way, learning and debating for nearly 50 years. She would enter a village, let it be known that she was there for a debate, wait for 7 days, and if no one dared to challenge her, which apparently happened quite often, she'd pick up shop and move to the next village. So this isn't too dissimilar from any of us who've spent longer or shorter times immersed in religions or philosophies or ways of life that have all turned out to be ultimately unsatisfactory. But we keep on doing them because we haven't found another way to be. We know this now as dukkha, as suffering or dissatisfaction. This word is a gift of insight that the Buddha offered to the world to allow us to recognize our suffering, to name it, and to have power over it. But as yet in the story, Baddha hadn't heard this word or knew this concept. So, however, she wasn't just roaming from village to village, crushing her opponents in debate just for the satisfaction of victory. The entire time she was searching for a teacher, for someone who was more knowledgeable than herself on the path to liberation. But everywhere she went, she was the most knowledgeable person, and since she continued on debating and searching. And it's at this time when Baddha was nearly 70 years old that she entered the town of Savatthi, or Sravasti in Sanskrit, near the Jeddah Grove Monastery, the Buddha's main monastery. And it just happened that Shariputra, one of the Buddha's two main students and the person who was just addressed in the Heart Sutra, he came into town, heard that Baddha was there, and accepted her challenge to debate. Baddha, it seems, she must have known about the Dharma, with the teachings of the Buddha. She must have known that they existed, at least from secondhand, since she spent so much time traveling and debating in the same areas that the early Buddhist Sangha was. So I wonder if she resisted approaching these monks and nuns, being firmly rooted in her identity as Baddha, the debater. She'd certainly hadn't encountered anyone like Shariputra, who was considered foremost in wisdom in prajna among the early Sangha. They sat down beside one another, and Baddha began asking Shariputra questions. And it's not written what they asked explicitly, but I imagine it must have been about the nature of Dharma, karma, samsara, and enlightenment. Whatever it was, Shariputra answered all of her questions to her satisfaction, and when it became his turn to question her, all he did was ask one simple question: what is the one? And like a koan, like one of those enigmatic statements from a Zen master that almost seems like a riddle, Shariputra threw out a question that was more than the sum of its words. Buddha turned this question over and over in her mind, and she could have answered in any number of ways: Brahman, which is God, the universe, the infinite, or even nourishment, since that's one of the basis of life. But with this one simple question, Buddha found herself at a loss. In over 50 years of wandering, she'd never found herself in such a situation. She'd always been the master of her domain. But after realizing this, instead of fighting it or trying to convince herself that one of her answers was right, or letting her pride get the better of her and having her stand up and storm off, Buddha realized that this could be exactly what she'd been looking for all these years. So she simply looked at the humble monk and said, "I don't know, Venerable Sir." And there it is. This is like the Zen master Ditsang said nearly 1400 years later. Excuse me. Not knowing is most intimate. Sometimes not knowing is the best thing for us. Shariputra then said that if she didn't know the answer to that simple question, how could she know anything else about a doctrine? And she knew he was right, and so she honored him and asked him to become her teacher. But even though he'd been able to stump her in the debate, Shariputra knew that Buddha was a student beyond even his means. And so he led her to the Buddha, who was just then teaching in the Jetta Grove Monastery. After she paid homage to him and stepped to one side, the Buddha said to her, "Better than 1,000 verses that are senseless and unconnected with the realization of nirvana is a single verse, if on hearing it one is calmed." And so it was upon hearing this verse that Buddha was enlightened. And this verse might seem a bit like a trifle. Like, it's so simple. How could that verse have brought her to enlightenment? But there was so much more that was happening within Baddha herself. When her husband had been killed, she entered what we call nowadays a bardo, an in-between, a time and place where all our conventional concepts and ideas about ourselves and our world break apart and fall away. And this often happens in times of great crisis. For the young Buddha, she quickly adopted a few new identities, first as a Jain nun and then as a debater with no equal. But in the debate with Shariputra, her identity as the great debater was shattered. Identities are not solid. They're impermanent like everything else, and they require effort to maintain. And when they fall away, we typically do everything we can to we do everything we can to escape that bardo, that uncertainty, that unknowing. But Buddha was also a veteran ascetic and meditator, so she must have seen and recognized what it was that her karma was urging her to do, which was to escape by finding a new identity. And finally, when she was presented to the Buddha, a person who had himself escaped the wheel of samsara, had ended his long trail of suffering, and who was completely at ease, she must have turned to that bardo, that lack of identity, and said, "This is my true nature. This is where my peace comes from the no self, from the everything." With that, Buddha became a follower of the way, residing at the nunnery at Savatthi. And it was very rare for someone to gain full enlightenment all at once after only just a few words from the Buddha. But of course, we know that Buddha had been practicing nearly her entire life. The many monastics at the monastery were very, very impressed with her, and she became known as one of the 13 foremost nuns of the early Sangha, foremost amongst those who are quick in deep knowledge. And as it turns out, we don't just have the story of Buddha's life, we have her actual words as well. Amongst the numerous books of the Pali Canon, the original collection of the Buddhist teachings is a book called the Tirtha, the verses of the elder nuns. These verses back to the time of the Buddha, and they take their final form about 300 years later. So it's about a 300-year period of collection of these poems. This collection, the Therigatha, is the oldest extant book that depicts the spiritual experiences of women in the world. The poems were written by a number of women, some famous, such as the Buddha's aunt and adoptive mother, Mahaprajapati, and as well as the former wife of one of the Buddha's main disciples, Mahakassapa, his wife, Baddha Kapilani, who is not to be confused with our Baddha, who is Baddha Kundalakesa, curly-haired Baddha. And these poems mainly deal with the early nuns' experiences of enlightenment. So here's Baddha's poem with a little bit of commentary for myself. I traveled before in a single cloth, single robe, with shaven head covered in dust, thinking of faults in the faultless, while in the faulty, seeing no faults. So here she's describing some of the Jain ascetic practices and tells how she came to view the Jain worldview as unskillful. When the day's abiding was done, I went to Vulture's Peak Mountain and saw the stainless Buddha revered by the order of bhikkhus, of the monks. Then before him with my hands in Anjali, I humbly bowed down on my knees. Come, Baddha, he said to me, and thus I was ordained. Now, these lines might not seem so extraordinary, but very few people, and Baddha was the only woman who were ordained by the Buddha by being called to come forward. This is a sign of immense respect and an acknowledgement of her incredible achievements during her wandering life. Continue. Debt-free, I traveled for 50 years in Anga, Magadha, and Vajji, and Kashi and Kosala too. These are all areas that were important as well in the life of the Buddha, where he spent a lot of his time traveling and teaching. Living on the alms of the land, living as a wandering beggar, lay supporter, wise man indeed, may much a merit accrue to him. He who gave a robe to Buddha for free of all ties is she. So it's quite common for lay Buddhists to gift robes to monks and nuns who frequented their towns, much like gifting them food as repayment for the teachings of the Dharma and to create merit for themselves in hopes of a more fruitful rebirth in the next life. And also at the very end, when she says, free of all ties is she, we have Buddha here declaring for all of us over 2,500 years later that she did indeed achieve the goal of the holy life. Her births were ended and her task was done. She had attained nirvana. And that's the story of our Dharma ancestor, Baddha Kundalakesa, curly-haired Buddha, who, strangely enough, was probably quite bald most of the time. There was just something about her life that really spoke to me when I first came across her story, and I really wanted to share it with all of you. And it's good, I feel, to discover people like Baddha who lived this life so long ago, who really set out on the path, and who left a record behind for us to read, letting us know millennia later that yes, this path is open to you and to me. Baddha lived an incredible life on the path to enlightenment, and although the times have changed and the world is much faster paced, we still tread that same path, all of us, in Baddha's footsteps. So, thank you. We've got a few minutes if anybody had any questions or comments on the story. No, we don't have too much. When I came across her story, I realized that I didn't really know about any of the early nuns other than Mahaprajapati, like a little bit. So I did know a bit about, you hear about Shariputra a lot, because these are many of the suttas that we chant. But one thing I took away is how long, quote unquote, it took for her to get on the path of, 50 years wandering and debating. It's true for a lot of us. For me specifically, I practiced meditation for 20 years almost before I finally sat down and really, officially became a Buddhist. So for a lot of us, our paths can be quite circular. Okay. There's no questions. We can have a period of meditation. Next, we will have joys and concerns. I can begin with my own joy. I had a stomach bug the last couple of weeks, and the last couple of days I'm actually able to eat again, which is nice to be able to appreciate how simple thing like having food in your stomach, feeling terrible because of it. So
I found a rubber band and I accidentally broke it. Hi, I'm just really grateful for this place and feeling joyful right now and just kind of blissed out a little bit and happy. So I'm very thankful for that. And concerns is I have a nonprofit and I'm looking for board members and people to help with it. So if anybody's interested, they can, talk to me about it. Thanks.
Not online? Okay. Well, if that's it, then we'll take a moment of silence. Next, we will have temple-related announcements. We have the board meeting, and everybody is invited. Excuse me. Third Sunday of every month from 11:30 to 1 p.m. We meet downstairs at the temple or via Google Meet. There's also the Buddhist-based recovery meetings, Mondays at the temple, or you can also join via Zoom. Wednesdays at the Alano Club, this is 1020 College Avenue Northeast, and Fridays at Garfield Park, and you can also join there via Zoom. We have the online meditation group Wednesdays from 7:30 till 8:15 p.m. You can also join via Zoom. If you have any more questions, you can contact Reverend Kunga about that. Let's see, that one's over. Yes, we have the 5 Buddhist preceptor training every other Sunday, September through December, which meets at the temple, 11:15 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. Registration ends September 1st, so it's coming up. And if you have questions about that, you can also contact Reverend Kunga. As well, we have a Fundamentals of Buddhism class coming up Saturday, October 7th from 9 a.m. till 12 p.m. noon, which meets at the temple. Registration for that ends September 30th. And as well, contact Reverend Kunga if you have any more questions. Do we have further announcements? Yes.
Good morning. My name is Ellen. Dana is a very important part of our practice. It means generosity. Many ways to do that. And one of them is time. And that's what you're doing right now is you're here sharing your time with us in the Sangha, and we appreciate that. Another time donation could be being a greeter at the door, lighting the incense, helping downstairs with set up and tear down after our receptions and potlucks, doing this, making the Dana announcement. Secondly, donation of items, and I always use the same examples: toilet paper, tea bags, and paper towels. I'm sure there's other things, but those help. And lastly, of course, is a financial donation. Money is what keeps the lights on. And no one here at the temple, absolutely no one, is compensated for anything that they do. That includes our teachers, our tech team, which is another way to donate your time, is helping out the tech team. No one receives a paycheck here. So financial donation is certainly accepted. We have Dana boxes on each end of the temple. Checks and cash go in those. There's also a QR code on each box that will take you right to PayPal. If you go to the temple's website, zengr.org, there's a donate button there. And if you're watching on YouTube today, right at the bottom of the screen is a Seymour, not to be confused by a man named Seymour, but Seymour. It's a drop-down menu, also takes you to PayPal. PayPal, you can make a one-time donation. You can set it up monthly, which can be changed or canceled at any time. So that's just another great way to go. So that's it, Dana, in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so with that,
Good morning. I have my script. I need to follow it so that you hear things as they need to be heard. Otherwise, I'll get it wrong. My name is, my Dharma name is Poshi. My given name is Jan Ensing, and I serve on the board as president and secretary. We have temple business that requires calling a meeting to amend Article 4 of our Articles of Incorporation to obtain legal recognition that we operate independently and have established our own school of practice. In 2011, we opened the Grand Rapids Zen Center and Buddhist Temple to practice together according to the discipline, rules, and usages of the Korean Buddhist Taego order. In 2013, the clergy and board resigned from that order, and our temple became independent, but they did not amend our Articles of Incorporation. Since then, our temple practices fluctuated. No longer a temple following Korean Buddhist traditions, practice often reflected the traditions of our various teachers of Korean, Japanese, and Tibetan Buddhism. In April 2022, the board president, senior teacher, and 2 founding members met to address these inconsistencies. With the board's support over the last 16 months, the Dharma Council developed practice curriculums and ceremonies and identified the Buddhist holidays we celebrate based on the foundational teachings of the Dharma. This culminated in establishing our own school, the Heartside Mindfulness School of Mahayana Buddhism. In doing so, we will amend Article 4 of our Articles of Incorporation to obtain legal recognition that we operate independently and have established our own school of practice. The language for this vote to amend Article 4 of our Articles of Incorporation will read, "The members of the church or society shall worship and label together according to the discipline, rules, and usages of the Grand Rapids Buddhist Temple, Heartside Mindfulness School of Mahayana Buddhism, established to operate independently in the United States of America or other jurisdictions as the case may be, as from time to time authorized and declared by no higher ecclesiastical body or bodies, if any, authorized to determine such question." This announcement is posted on all the bulletin boards. There's one at each entrance, and there's one downstairs. A special announcement with access to vote online will be sent today, about a minute from now, and to all who subscribe to our newsletter. So if you haven't subscribed, you can do so and then vote online. That would be, you could go to zengr.org and there will be buttons that you could subscribe to our newsletter. We will hold a ballot vote next Sunday, September 3, for those unable to vote online. Please vote by next Sunday, September 3, by 11 a.m. to confirm the board and Dharma Council's decision to amend Article 4 of our Articles of Incorporation. Results of this vote will be announced on Friday, September 8 in the newsletter and at the Sunday service on September 10. If you have any questions about this amendment, please talk to me or email me at jensing@zengr.org. And thank you for your time. Please vote.
If I could just offer a little bit of historical context on that, when the split originally happened back in the day, that was initiated because we were sending some of our first Bodhisattva candidates, I guess you would say, to Korea, to the home temple. And we found that the men were coming back and having good experiences, and some of the women came back and did not feel like they were welcome, like it was resented that they were, trying to become monks. And so that's where that originally, if you're wondering, like, well, why would we ever have split from the Korean Taego order? That's sort of what prompted that there was just this issue of equality there. So I would encourage everybody to vote yes, just sort of nail that one down.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. With that, we will have our closing gathas on page 9. For all unskillful actions ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thoughts, now I atone for them all. Vast is the robe of compassion, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Buddhist teachings for the benefit of all sentient beings. All beings, one body, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passion, I vow to uproot. Dharma gates without number, I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha, I vow to attain. One final time, we'll greet each other with bows. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. See you all soon.